So, who was the historical King Solomon?
Yes. You see, the thing is, now we are talking in historical terms. The chronology of the Bible, the way the Bible tells the story is different than we have it in history.
Yeah.
So we have, as we said before, Amenhotep, Tutmosis III, I have identified as being David of the Bible, who established an empire, and then he also fathered Isaac from his Hebrew wife, Sarah, and Isaac brought two children, twins, Esau and Jacob, but Jacob bought the birthright, as a successor of the father, from his wife, and then from his brother, and it got the title Israel, Elohim rules, the royal kind of title. And then his son, the third generation of the Pharaoh from Sarah, Joseph, came to Egypt and was appointed by the Pharaoh as his minister. This is the third generation of Pharaoh from the line of Sarah, the Hebrew woman.
Okay.
At the same time, Tutmosis III also had, from his Egyptian queen, had three generations. It is Amenhotep II, then Tutmosis III, then Amenhotep III at the time of Uya ruled Egypt. So the third generation from both sides met at the time of Joseph and Amenhotep III. So I do believe. Why do I believe that? You see, if we were to compare the story of Solomon in the Bible with the history as we know it,
yes, of
Amenhotep III, we find almost everything is the same.
That's your proof.
Yeah. First of all, he inherited an empire between the Nile and the Euphrates without having to go to fighting. This is Solomon in the Bible. Amenhotep III inherited the same. He had many riches, gold and riches and things, because of the empire. And we have, Egypt became at its climax of richness and in art and money and everything during the time of Amenhotep III. He, according to the Bible, Solomon arranged the tax. He made 12 times the tax, divided into 12 sections. Amenhotep III, for the first time, also divided the year into 12 parts of the section, and each part of the empire provided him the tax to cover his expenses for 1 month. So 12 sections, part of the empire, covered his needs for the 12 months. He also Solomon is said to have established an administration, to arrange things, government administration in the Egypt and in his capital and in the empire. And we know that Amenhotep III was the first one really to establish this kind of administration, following his father's or grandfather's establishing of the empire. And again, you see, during the time of Amenhotep III, the Egyptian administration, the Egyptian writing and texts were very much developed. So administration needs writing, text and books and so on. On the other hand, the Hebrew writing, the very early Hebrew writing did not appear between the 9th century BC.
What language was it? Aramaic?
Now, it was the spoken language that the Hebrews became written in Hebrew was the Canaanite language. It is they call it Northwest, Semitic language. It is the spoken language of Canaan was written in text, you see. And this, the earliest text for this Hebrew writing that is written in the Bible later on only appears in the 9th century BC. That is 100 years before the time of biblical Solomon. That means at the time of biblical Solomon, 10th century BC, there was no written...
What about the timing between the Bible and the history?
Yeah, about 5 centuries difference.
So,
yeah, I mean,
so
the history
is the right time, or the Bible is the right time?
The history certainly is the right time because we have evidence to confirm the same story of the Bible that talks about Solomon. We find evidence of these events in the, archaeologically in the time of Amenhotep III. So the story was taken.
So the Bible time is wrong.
The Bible time is certainly wrong, because that's why until this moment, archaeologists have not found any little piece of evidence to confirm any part of the stories of either David or Solomon, because they have been placed by the biblical narrators in a different location, much later than the historical. If we look at the time of Solomon, we find, of Amenhotep III, we find everything regarding Solomon. Amenhotep III and Solomon is the same thing. Now, we know also from the Bible and that Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, according to the Bible. Now, also we know for sure that Pharaoh never ever agreed to give his daughter to any foreign rulers. We have many cases when a foreign ruler wanted to marry an Egyptian princess and it was refused. But we know that Amenhotep III, in order to come to the throne, married his sister, the daughter of his father, the Pharaoh of his father, although she was a little girl, about 2 years of age. Sitamon, his name was Sitamon. But according to Egyptian traditions, he had to marry his daughter, the heiress, in order to get the right to the throne. So he married his sister there. And then, according
King Solomon lived in Egypt.
Amenhotep III lived in Egypt, and he is the historical King Solomon, whose story.
He didn't live in Canaan.
He never went to Canaan. He never went to Canaan.
What about Lebanon?
He never went to anywhere else. He didn't.
Amenhotep III went to Lebanon.
No, he never went to. His grandfather, David, went because he fought to establish the empire. So he went about 17 years. He went every part of the Levant to fight and establish the empire. But Amenhotep III, who was Solomon, never went out of Egypt. He was living in Egypt all the time. He inherited the empire. You see, the story was found and was placed in the wrong period of history by the biblical narrators. So we find, also we know that, from the Bible, that Solomon married many princesses, foreign princesses. He had many foreign princesses as wives.
Many wives.
Yeah. Amenhotep III, because he didn't need any fighting with the parts of the empire, he married. We know that from historical sources. He had many. 2 Babylonian princesses, why?
To make peace?
To make peace, yes. It is well-known story that Solomon had from the Bible, that he had hundreds of women in his harem, and we know for sure from historical sources that Amenhotep III had hundreds of. What I am telling you is that whatever the story tells us of the Bible of Solomon, we have it historically from Amenhotep.
Where King Solomon name came from then?
No, I will tell you all this. The name Solomon and the temple and so on, Jerusalem, I will speak to it next time. But now I have only to tell you why I believe Amenhotep III.
Yeah, your proof. Why you think Amenhotep III is King Solomon?
Yeah, because everything we find in the Bible about Solomon, we find it in the history of Amenhotep III. For instance, we know that Solomon built a royal palace and a temple next to the royal palace. Amenhotep III built a royal palace and a temple. It is supposed that Solomon built many cities, many establishments, and we find, because he had a long piece of rule, about 39 years ruling Egypt. The Bible says Solomon ruled for 40 years, so it's the same kind of period. He had enough money and wealth to build more than one temple and one royal palace and so on, all over the place. If we were to compare the story of Solomon in the Bible and the story of Amenhotep III, in history we find it the same. One other thing which is very also important is we know from the Bible that because of his many foreign wives, the Bible says that Solomon did not only worship the Hebrew God, he also worshipped other deities. The Bible talks about Solomon having the Israelite God, who is one God, monotheistic God, but at the same time, the Bible says that Solomon was under the influence of his foreign wives, believed in other worship. Strange. This is a very strange situation. Also, here we find Amenhotep III in the same position. Why and how? Amenhotep III obviously worshipped Ammon and worshipped all the other Egyptian deities. Yes, he was the pharaoh of Egypt. But, as we will know later, he had a son, Amenhotep IV.
He worshipped Ammon, not Aton.
No, he worshipped all the other Egyptian deities, as it is. But his son, Akhenaten, became known as Akhenaten, introduced the new God of the single God, monotheistic God, one universal God. So
here we like to remind people, because they might didn't hear it in the past record, that you said Akhenaten is Moses.
Yeah, obviously we'll come back again to this,
talk about it,
because you see, the Bible talks about Moses before talking about Solomon, but we are reversing the story. We are talking about Solomon before talking about Moses. In reality, it will turn out that Solomon is the father of Moses, historical Moses. Anyhow, what I want to tell you, that the Bible says, and this is not a common situation in the history of anybody. He worshipped. The Bible says that Solomon worshipped many deities because was persuaded or influenced by his foreign wives, but he also worshipped the one monotheistic God. And this is a unique situation, and we find Amenhotep III in the very same situation. He worshipped all the other deities, but when his son introduced Aton as the one God, we find that Amenhotep III also worshipped Aton, the one God, before he died.
So he was alive when he worshipped Aton.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about Aton later on, but what I mean to say that this similar to the Bible story about account about, Solomon worshipping other gods at the same time as the one Israelite single monotheistic God. It is the same situation. This is a unique situation. It cannot repeat really, because if you worship one God, you have to repeat. But he did that. So I believe that anything really we know from the Bible about Solomon, we don't find any evidence of it in Canaan. We don't find any evidence because until now. No single part of evidence. You can only know about Solomon from the Bible. History does not talk about somebody called Solomon. We don't know anybody, from historical sources.
And not really much about King Solomon in history.
So, again, his name was not Solomon. As we will talk about next time. Solomon had an earlier name, and who became known later as Solomon. We will talk about this later. But what I want to just to tell you now, that everything we know from the Bible about Solomon, King Solomon, we don't have any historical evidence of it in Canaan during the 10th century BC. We had all the evidence to confirm all the details of the Solomon story in the 15th century, 14th century, started 15th, 14th century in Egypt at the time of Amenhotep III. And that's why it was Solomon, Amenhotep III, who united the two branches of King David, the Hebrew line from Sarah and the Egyptian line, united them in marriage when he himself, Solomon himself, Amenhotep III himself, married the daughter of Joseph, the patriarch of Egypt. And
what was her name?
Queen Tai, and not only married her because he had many wives, but he made her his queen, indicating that he must have known that she came from the same descendants from his great grandfather Amenhotep, Thutmose III.
Not only he loved her.
He loved her, yes, and he loved her. If he loved her, he can marry her. But why should he make her his queen unless he knew that she comes from the same royal line of him from Thutmose III?
But here it comes to me like, why they change the time in the Bible, you think?
As I told you, when the biblical narrators sat down in Babylon in the 6th century BC, a long time, about 8 centuries after what's going, and they started to write the Bible. They have different stories. They have different stories, separate stories, not in a chronology, and they, according to their own interpretation, put this thing here and this thing here. And because the Exodus, the turning point of the Israelite life, was created by a conflict between the Israelites and the Pharaoh, there was some kind of enmity towards Pharaoh of Egypt. So they wanted deliberately, in fact, to cut any kind of connection between Egypt, Pharaoh of Egypt, and Pharaoh became the symbol of oppression and so on. So that's why they could not regard Pharaoh as their father. It turned out that in reality, the great grandfather of the Israelites was not Abraham the Hebrew, but Pharaoh of Egypt, Thutmose III, who is known as David.
But we'd like to have more specific details about King Solomon, because this is very sensitive,
Yes. Next time we will talk about two things.
Yes.
About why he was known as David, his relationship with Jerusalem, and the temple he built. And where is the temple? And did he
Where's
build?
the real temple is?
This is the subject of next time.
Because there is until these days no evidence of the real temple.
Yeah, we will talk about it, of course, and we have the evidence.
Okay. Thank you very much for today. And here I would like to tell people about you. Mr. Ahmed Osman has 7 books published: Moses and Akhenaten, Christianity and Ancient Egyptian Religion, The Hebrew Pharaohs of Egypt, The Lost City of Exodus, Jesus in the House of Pharaohs, The Soul of Ancient Egypt, Breaking the Mirror of Heaven, and his new book, The Egyptian Origin of King David and the Temple of Solomon, is now pre-selling on Amazon. Thank you.
Thank you.